British. These are sort of my 7 kind of ideas where that mothers tell their daughters to protect them, which I guess inadvertently shape a young woman's transition into adulthood. Like, it passes on this sort of caged mentality that even before we experience the things which try to cage our mothers, it shapes us into kind of fitting into those cages before we actually experience, I guess, the patriarchal structures that our mothers have kind of experienced and are trying to protect us from, and it kind of repeats the cycle. So the first one, always my favorite, is this what you will do in your husband's house? Because it's essentially a mother trying to tell you that there are certain ways in which a woman or a wife has been told that she must exist. And if you don't conform to these things, then there's going to be wahala, there's going to be trouble. Wahala being like the Nigerian term for trouble, Yoruba term for trouble. So it's her trying to protect you from experiencing those things that someone who is a wife, someone who is a mother would go through. But what she doesn't realize she's doing when she says, is this what you'll do in your husband's house? Is kind of, you're a young girl and it's almost like taking away that aspect of childhood, taking away the aspect of autonomy, of growing, of trying to figure out for yourself who you are and shaping your existence as conforms to the idea of a husband who doesn't exist in reality yet, but whose existence already shapes your being. So the second point is, one day you will marry a rich man. I think there was a point on Twitter, I must have seen when someone was like, when their mother told them one day they'd marry a rich man, they turned around and told her, "Mother, I am that rich man," which I kind of clicked to. But this kind of phrase, one day you'll marry a rich man, again, it's a mother kind of understanding that there are economic factors that will hinder you in your progress in terms of being a woman. There are things that you will need to think about financially. And she understands that the positions that she's probably been in where like money was scarce, she's trying to save you from that. But rather than save you from that in allowing you to kind of save yourself, essentially what she's saying is that one day, patriarchal Prince Charming will come with like stacks of money. You're the damsel in distress in the tower. He'll build up the money stacks and climb them to save you. And essentially, she's shaping you to be that damsel in distress. She's shaping you to, before you've even thought of ways to kind of, I guess, exist in the world and kind of make your own sort of revenue, make your own sort of how you'd want to kind of live in the world. You're already thinking, okay, I'm dependent on a man financially. I must be dependent on a man financially. That even if you're making your own income, when you get one day you'll marry a rich man, so you won't need to think about all of these things. Like all of your I guess your sense of self and being can be dependent on a man, because that's what I guess finances allow for women to have. It allows the freedom of choice, to be honest. It allows freedom of movement. You kind of find often that in situations, I guess especially to just kind of talk on abusive situations where it's the guy who essentially controls the woman's finances. And what that allows is for the repression of freedom. Again, it allows for her to kind of stay within this cage, because where can you fly to if you can't afford the wings? But that kind of leads me to the third point, when I was your age. And this can either be used as when I was your age, I did do XYZ, or when I was your age, I didn't do XYZ. Again, it's kind of, I guess to say coercion or manipulation kind of fills it with a sort of, I guess, a more insidious kind of harmful intent, which I don't think is there. Rather than having, I guess, an open and honest, a vulnerable conversation, it's kind of patched up in creating a version of reality that didn't exist. And what that inadvertently does is it kind of sets you up to this unattainable ideal, something that even they didn't meet those expectations for themselves, and they've kind of set this up for you, again with good intentions, but in a way that doesn't allow you to kind of bridge the gap between their experience and yours. So point number 6, respect your elders, even when they're wrong. And it definitely has its merits. You definitely see like culturally how that works. I think where it starts to fail is when you have, I guess, the blurring of the lines between what it means to give someone respect and what it means to give someone complete and total deference, even when they're wrong. Maybe a woman is in the presence of her uncles and maybe she feels uncomfortable. She no longer feels able to reprimand them or create a boundary for herself because, oh, I must be respectful. So being respectful to a man or being respectful to your elder then is prided above your own sense of autonomy, your own sense of self and thinking, and your own sense of creating boundaries for yourself. It doesn't allow girls to kind of establish boundaries which prevent or may prevent people who are older than them from potentially causing harm. And I think that's probably one of the, I guess, the most poignant parts of the, I guess, that's quite negative from the whole respect your elders, even when they're wrong. As long as you give them respect, then even if you're telling them off, do it respectfully. So you kind of, oh my gosh, I remember this being said to me, and it was the most annoying thing. So I'm just like having flashbacks to that moment. But essentially, it prevents girls from kind of being able to kind of speak their truth because they're thinking about being respectful. And this kind of leads me on to the last point, which is a pretty short one. It's a four-word one, but what will people say? So your mother sits you down and it's like, maybe you have a tattoo that has like loads of meaning to you. She sits you down and she's like, my child, what will people say? It's an interesting one, this phrase, because it's not necessarily, I don't like this thing, or I think it's wrong, or I think you should change it. It becomes a, what do I think society will say, and how do I think society will treat you? And in trying to protect you from what society may or may not say to you, I'm trying to change you, shape you, I'm trying to reprimand you based on what I hypothetically think society may say to you, or how I think they may react to you. Again, this is like another form of kind of limiting young girls. I think it's probably the saddest one, I'd say, because it kind of shows you that your mother's beliefs are already entrenched in a way. Because if your belief of what society is not only entrenched in your mind, but it is shaping how and what you tell your daughter to do, and what you tell your daughter to do. It's almost like it's become fixed. Like, if you think this is what society is, even before society tells you what you should and shouldn't do, if mentally you've already kind of accepted that cage and you're passing it on down to your daughter. Going back to that original idea that our mothers will sometimes tell young girls things that they think are protecting them, but which inadvertently are, I guess, shaping them and kind of conforming them to this cage before they've even experienced the patriarchal structure that is going to like possibly inflict this on them. If our mothers are doing this to their young daughters, when we try to talk about changing society and changing patriarchal structures, we have to kind of remember not to forget, I guess, almost our mothers. We have to try to, I guess discussions like these where we can actually sit them down and be like, I know you mean the best for me, but this is what you're actually doing. And you're trying to protect me, but what you're doing is you're making me more afraid, or you're making me the woman in the room that doesn't speak up when she's surrounded by men, even if she has a great point. If I do want to change what's going on the outside, how I'm treated on the outside, I'm going to start from home. I'm going to try and change how, as hard as it may be, because nothing is ever easy, the ideas that my mother has had and kind of has passed on to me,